I'm very excited to be hosting this panel about the homelessness crisis today. I think in Los Angeles, sometimes we can be a little bit smug, thinking we kind of live in this woke bubble, but as we know, the homelessness crisis is at epidemic proportions in California. So I'm really excited to talk to our guests today to understand a bit more about why that is on a local and national level, and what we can do to maybe get involved and to tackle this situation. I think what's so wonderful about this panel is that each organisation is tackling homelessness from a different perspective in creative and positive ways. So to get started, it would be wonderful if we could go around and you could introduce yourselves and tell us a bit about your organisations and the kind of services and basically the goal of your organisation briefly. I know everyone has a kind of a vast array of services, so just to get a feel of what each organisation is doing. Maybe Jordyn, we could start with you.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Jordyn Roark, and I am the Director of Youth Leadership and Scholarships with Schoolhouse Connection. And Schoolhouse Connection is a national nonprofit organization working to overcome homelessness through education. So we do this by providing strategic advocacy and practical assistance in partnership with schools, early childhood programs, institutions of higher education, service providers, families, and youth. We believe that education is the only permanent solution to homelessness. And our vision is that children and youth experiencing homelessness have full access to quality learning or through higher education so that they are not homeless as adults and the next generation does not experience homelessness. So my specific role in the organization as the director of our national scholarship program is to work with students across the country. So we award scholarships to students who have experienced homelessness nationally. And in addition to a scholarship, they also receive 2 all-expenses paid trips, abilities to engage in local, state, and national advocacy, as well as comprehensive, intensive case management to ensure that they are successful getting to and through higher education.
That's fantastic. Daniel, you also work in the realm of sort of youth and education.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much to Tabitha for moderating and to LA Gives Back for having us. And it's a total honor to be here with Jordyn and Holly. It rocks. So I work for an organization called My Friend's Place. We've been in Hollywood in Los Angeles for almost 33 years now. And we work with youth experiencing homelessness, so ages 12 to 25. And we offer a really, really broad range of services. So everything from, what we think of as basic human rights services, that's food, clothing, hygiene, taking a shower, those kinds of things, all the way up to housing case management, employment readiness, and sort of everything in between. We really know that for a lot of youth who are experiencing homelessness, it's not as simple as just finding housing. A lot of the youth that we are working with, all of the youth that we're working with, have been severely impacted by having the adults in their lives let them down in one way or another. And building that trust back up is a huge part of our work. So we offer a broad range of arts workshops, everything from performing arts like circus to painting to computer skills. So really understanding that there is a broad range of needs that young people who have experienced the trauma of being unhoused, as well as other traumas they may have experienced in their lives, knowing that we really need to offer a broad range of services to make up for that. So my particular role, I'm a special events coordinator. So I get to do a lot of our, pre-COVID, of course, like public events, but a lot of it I think of as storytelling. So we're telling the stories of the truly remarkable young people who come to My Friend's Place every single day. I love our mission is very simple, and it's simply to assist and inspire homeless youth to build self-sufficient lives. And it's an honor to be here.
That's fantastic, because I think we so often think of it in very narrow terms, homelessness, and not the trauma that people experience and these whole other layers. So even just that begins to reframe how we think about it. Holly, tell us about Downtown Women's Centre.
Yeah, so my name is Holly Hight, and I'm the Director of Donor Relations at the Downtown Women's Center. And we've had a partnership with LA Gives Back for a number of years now, and just really want to give a thanks to anyone who's already donated and contributed. It's just really an honor to be here and to share with you about our work at Downtown Women's Center. So we've been around for about 40 years, and our mission is to end homelessness for women in Los Angeles. And so we have a variety of services that we provide. Pre-COVID, we had a really great drop-in day center where women who were currently living on Skid Row could come in and sign up for showers, have a warm meal, receive their mail, connect with counseling to help place them in housing. So we really focus on being kind of an all-encompassing service provider, similar to what My Friend's Place does. The other thing that I appreciate that Dan said is we really have a trauma-informed perspective. So our work is done from the perspective where we know 90% of the women who walk through our door or live on site with us have some sort of trauma in their lifetime. And we know that both childhood traumas as well as adult traumas can lead to homelessness. So whether that's domestic violence or a sexual assault. So the trauma-informed perspective, it doesn't ask the question of what's wrong with you. It asks the question, what happened to you? So it's a reframe where it really looks at kind of how can we address these traumas in a way that helps you move past them and be more self-sufficient. So just really honored to be here, and I can say more about our work later too.
Yeah, just to get a kind of idea of the broader kind of issue, how extensive is the homelessness? How extensive is homeless? I mean, I know there's a lot of different definitions of homelessness and a lot of different ways of kind of framing those numbers. Daniel, you know, and Jordyn as well, from a youth perspective, how big is this problem on a kind of national scale right now?
Sure. Yeah, I'll start. So yeah, we at Schoolhouse Connection, as I mentioned, we work in the education sector, which means that we utilize something called the Mckinney-Vento definition of homelessness, which is the definition that is used nationally in all of our school systems. And according to our Mckinney-Vento data, prior to the pandemic, in the 2017 to 2018 school year, which is our most recent data set, there were 1.5 million children and youth experiencing homelessness, which is just a staggering statistic and was the largest ever recorded number to date. In addition to the 1.5 million in the K through 12 system, they also found that 1.4 million children ages birth to age 6 were experiencing homelessness as well. And we also know that at least 1 in 30 adolescents ages 13 to 17 and nearly 1 in 10 young adults ages 18 to 24 experience homelessness on their own, so without a parent or guardian. And so, as I mentioned, these statistics alone are staggering, and it doesn't even take into account the pandemic, because we're still figuring out exactly how the pandemic is impacting our children, families, and individuals across our nation. But what we know is that due to the economic downfall and family crisis that we're seeing nationally, the numbers are going to go up. One thing that I can share is that recently, we at Schoolhouse Connection surveyed school districts nationally, and we asked them to compare their enrollment from last fall to this fall. And what they found was that there was a 28% decrease in the number of children and youth that were identified and enrolled that were experiencing homelessness. So what that means is that there were 420,000 children and youth nationally that were homeless and in school last year that are not in school this year. And that is a huge issue because they didn't go away, but they've gone off our radar. We don't know where they are. And so not only are we seeing the homelessness numbers increase, we're bringing in, there's new families experiencing homelessness. We know it as a result of the pandemic, but also the ones that already were are now not connected to the critical resources that provided them sometimes their only stability that they had.
Is this kind of concur with your experience, Daniel? And how is this, you know, pandemic aside, how has this shifted over the last say 20 years?
Yeah. God, those statistics are just shocking. Just sort of take that in. I want to start by saying that we work with a bit of a different population. So we are mainly working with people, with youth who are about 18 to 25. That's sort of our general, the range of people that we're offering services to. And that's simply because of our service model, right? We're working with a lot of young people who have left the foster care system. So I just want to, or alternatively, been thrown out of their housing because of their queer or LGBTQIA identity. I just want to center that to start with, because that is like the frame for our work. But sort of in general, over the past 20 years, I think anybody who's living in LA, you can literally just see it, right? I mean, there has been a massive increase in homelessness. I mean, some numbers I was looking at this morning, from 2012 to 2016, excuse me, to 2018, we saw more than a 75% increase. And yeah, again, it's just shocking, right? And that was before we had some of the more refined tools in the homeless counts that we have now that LAHSA is doing. And those continue to show just more and more and more. And also as we expand our definition, right, that we, are not thinking of homelessness as just people who are currently living on the street, but also people who are living in their cars. That can be much, much harder to count. And that's especially true for young people, right? So youth homelessness is extremely hard to quantify because young people are different, right? An 18-year-old and their habits are going to be fundamentally different from a 42-year-old. Just as an example. So, a lot of the young people that are experiencing homelessness may be crashing with friends on other people's couches. They may have other like temporary places to stay. They may sometimes be able to stay with their families. So it's a bit different, but what we have seen is a just massive increase. In the past year alone, in the youth homeless count, there was a 19% increase. And that's despite more people being sheltered than ever. And it's simply because more people are losing housing. So even as, we sort of slowly expand our ability to shelter people, the rate at which housing insecurity is increasing in Los Angeles it's simply too much. And I think that, I know we'll talk later about some of the causes for that, but I just think it's really important to center that yes, it's true, we're housing more people. There are more resources available, with, some of the recent measures that passed in California, providing more funds for housing homeless people. Sometimes you hear discourse like, well, why are there still more people? And it's because it is so difficult to find housing in California right now. And again, recentering, youth, I will say that the population we're seeing at my friend's place has shifted really dramatically in the past 20 years. When we started, we were serving a lot of what you might call crust punks, right? These are people you might see on Hight Street in San Francisco or in Hollywood in Los Angeles. Really colorful hair, lots of spikes, really into, cool punk music, right? And we've seen that population is not what we're serving as much anymore. Right now, we're serving largely, as I said, queer identifying young people who have maybe lost housing because they were thrown out by their parents or their guardians. A lot of young people leaving the foster care system. And similar to the numbers that you'll see in the adult population, an absolutely disproportionate number of African Americans. So particularly Black men. So despite making up about 8% of the population of LA County, African Americans make up about 40% of the youth homelessness population.
Yeah, I want to kind of dive into all of that, a little bit more about the policy and about the inequality and the way inequalities are represented in the homelessness community. But Holly, what's your experience of how significant this problem is in California? And building on what Daniel was saying, why is it such a huge issue in California specifically? I mean, I know there's a lot of reasons, but maybe just sort of some headlines about why that is.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I know there's been a lot of attention on this because, it's been kind of a talking point that Trump has gotten on about just these liberal places that have high rates of homelessness and all sorts of things. California has most recent statistics about 150,000 homeless individuals. In Los Angeles alone, we account for 60,000 of those people. And then for women specifically, which DWC serves, we see about 20,000 women experiencing homelessness in Los Angeles County. And I think we as an agency always root our work in data. All our work is data informed, and we every year do a needs assessment where we survey about 300 to 400 women to see like, what are the reasons you're experiencing homelessness? What are your top needs for services? And we found the number one reason that women are experiencing homelessness in Los Angeles is they're unable to afford rent. And the United Way has a really helpful statistic on this. They've said that their Everyone In campaign is just excellent. And through that campaign, they've said that 600,000 families are paying 90% of their income on rent. So just imagine if you're making $2,000 or $1,200 a month and you're paying $1,000 of that money. You only have $200 left to buy food, to pay for a medical bill. So you're one medical bill or one emergency away from homelessness. I think this becomes more acute when we think about the pandemic and just how that's impacting people. Other causes are domestic violence for women. So we've seen an uptick in this within the pandemic. We know that a lot of women have had to return to abusive relationships because of losing jobs or having their income affected. A statistic I wasn't aware of until I was reading more about this was that people who are formerly incarcerated are 10 times more likely to experience homelessness than the general public. So we see a lot of people coming from the prison system and entering homelessness because they may not qualify for some of the public housing programs. So I want to just quickly go back to something Jordyn said. I don't know the exact statistic, but I think I heard for like every 3 people who receive housing in Los Angeles, there's 5 more that are entering homelessness. So it's just this kind of like treading up water problem right now, where we're not able to build enough housing or find enough housing. We are housing, like over 20,000 people got housing last year, but we're not able to keep up with the systemic causes of homelessness, which is lack of affordable rents in Los Angeles or throughout California. And that makes tackling the problem really challenging.
I wonder if we could speak to some of the other systemic causes, maybe on a personal level. And are there any kind of misconceptions around that area, Jordyn or Daniel? Or are they typically, as we'd expect,
Yeah, I think one of the things that is, I'll just jump in first and then throw it to you, Jordyn. Like, one of the things that I think is really important and sort of strangely not centered in a lot of the discourse surrounding homelessness is poverty. I think a lot of the time people think of homelessness and poverty as separate but maybe related issues. And I think a lot of that has to do with the sort of misconstrued archetype of what it means to be an unhoused person, right? I mean, portrayals in the media of people who are unhoused and sort of just in normal discourse, right, tend to be someone who's maybe experiencing severe mental health symptoms, maybe has a substance use history, and maybe is living on Skid Row. And that just does not match up to the realities of especially early homelessness for a lot of people. And I think it's really important to center something that Holly just said, that, the reason the vast majority of people are entering homelessness, and we have to remember that entering homelessness is a huge trauma in and of itself. To no longer have a place where you can safely rest, the loss of that stability is, for I think a lot of people, myself included, like an unimaginable trauma. And that the driving force of that is the economy, right? Is that people, we know that, most Americans, I forget the exact statistic, can't afford a $400 emergency. And emergencies happen, right? And especially if you're living in a place like Los Angeles where rent is so expensive. And we can talk later about some of the structural reasons why rent is so expensive, right? Because it's that's one of the structures that we're up against. But I think it's just so important to center that the reason for behind a lot of the structures that lead to homelessness is simply poverty, right? And the various ways that manifests.
Yeah, I'll build off of what Holly and Dan both said, especially on this idea of treading uphill. But I kind of want to sway a little bit to expand on this idea of, we have the economic issues, we have the poverty. I think that we also have a general lack of resources. And I was going to build on this later. I think it applies here, though. So I think that fundamentally we have traditionally, especially government, considered homelessness as exclusively a housing issue. Mm-hmm. And then I think that is a failure when thinking exclusively, keyword exclusively, as it being a housing issue, because it ignores the systemic issues, barriers, and lack of resources that are at play that both cause an individual to enter homelessness the first time and that impedes their ability to obtain and maintain self-sustaining long-term housing to exit, right? And I think a good analogy might be to consider the COVID-19 pandemic. So, imagine within COVID-19 if we focused exclusively on increasing ICU beds and serving the most critically ill. We would be serving those that are most in need, but would other people still not continue to become sick? And it would just continue to be this perpetuating problem that would only continue to grow. And I think that that is where we need to identify that lack of access to education, to employment, transportation, childcare, mental and physical health care, and general supports, case management, parenting support. Those are all things that both cause people to enter homelessness and causes them to not be able to re-enter housing. And I think what's cool is that, on a brighter side, the organizations that are here today on this panel are great examples of organizations that are combating that, because they're not just providing, here's a referral to housing. They're able to provide comprehensive support to their client populations to ensure that they have what they need to exit that cyclic nature that is homelessness, if that makes sense.
Are you also trying to tackle the issue from a policy perspective, trying to push back against these governmental policies that are so detrimental? Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. For the sake of time, I'll focus on one bill in particular as an example of kind of what we're doing. So we at Schoolhouse Connection work both state and federally on policy to both remove barriers and red tape that's in place, as well as to increase and bring in new resources. So right now in particular, we're working on something called the Emergency Family Stabilization Act, which is really cool. It's a bipartisan bill that would create a new flexible funding stream that would stream right into your local community. And it would go to the entities and the organizations that are seeing the families and youth. So think My Friend's Place, for example. And the funding would be able to be used for emergency housing, health, and any other needs that My Friend's Place is seeing that their client population needs. So it's that idea of flexible funding, right? And it would be able to be used immediately using the broader definition of homelessness, which is something that Dan pointed to as being a restrictive factor in the past, right? And the idea is that if we stabilize youth and families using the systems that they are most connected to and that they have the most trust in, we will be able to most effectively and efficiently serve them, right? So that's one example of a bipartisan bill that we are working on getting through. And right now, it currently has significant bipartisan support and huge champions that are working towards it. And if it is not included in this current session, we are confident that it will be a priority for the next session.
That's great to hear. Is anything happening, say, in California? Because it seems like the big issue is that rent's too high. Is there any work being done that you're aware of to try and stem this ever increasing rent, mountain to rent control? Is there anything, or is that such a broad and difficult issue? Holly, are you aware of anything that's trying to tackle this issue of just rent being too high for people?
I would have to do a little more looking into that since the advocacy and policy isn't under my purview, but I do know that a lot of our work includes advocating for Section 8 housing and getting vouchers for women to access housing. And those are all important policies to help subsidize rent and make it more affordable. So we have a community-based housing program that works with landlords around LA County. And we have really good relationships with them where we're asking them most of them charge market rate, which a lot of the women we serve can't afford. So they're willing to accept a voucher, or they're willing to open up to Section 8 housing. So those relationships have been really key. I don't know, Jordyn, do you have any policies that you all have been working on related to rent and those kind of things?
Yeah, so primarily for us, again, we're more focused in the education sector. So we're working primarily on, for example, policies around minor consent to mental health care, policies such as that. But I do know that the rent cost in California is a huge discussion point. So I would not be surprised if there are current policy moves that are being put into play to address it, because I think both Dan and Holly are right that is a critical issue, looking at the median household income compared to the fair market rent in the areas in California. I mean, it's just not feasible. So yeah, I'm sure that there is something. I can't speak to a specific one right now.
I just wanted to jump in and say, I know with COVID, we have seen at the state level a lot of the eviction moratorium that has been in place. And there's some work with the state legislature to continue some of that rent forgiveness. So people have been probably building up owed rent, and there's a movement to cancel all that rent and try and provide landlords some assistance, as well as the tenants who might be evicted when those eviction moratoriums come up.
Yeah, sorry to spring that question on you, Holly.
That's okay.
I'd love to know a little bit about, get a little bit more of a feel for kind of what you do on the ground. So, Holly, how do you actually connect with the people that you serve at the Downtown Women's Center?
Yeah, so a lot of women find out about us by word of mouth. The networks are pretty strong in the community. We have kind of referrals to our website. So if a woman's experiencing a domestic violence situation and needs to find alternative housing, they can call us and get connected with a case manager. I just wanted to share a story of one of the women that we've served. Her name is Julie, and she came to us. She had been working for a bank in Pasadena. She lost her job because her employer found out that she had been living in her car, and just ran into a situation previously where her landlord had raised her rent, and then she ended up living in her car and lost her job. She ended up in Skid Row, kind of seeking services, and found her way to Downtown Women's Center. And I think one thing that was really hard for Julie is that she previously didn't have a lot of mental health issues, but the experience of becoming homeless brought on new psychological issues for her. And I think it goes back to what Dan said earlier, that the experience of losing that stability of home often brings on unexperienced mental illness, or previously, things that you didn't struggle with before come about. So I think that just gets to your earlier question, Tabitha, of I think people have this misconception that all people experiencing homelessness are mentally ill, or that they entered homelessness mentally ill. But the experience of being homeless really can provoke mental illness. So I just wanted to say that. So we really connect with this population through kind of outreach that our case managers do, as well as word of mouth of people hearing about our services and coming to us.
It is, because it is such a huge and vast issue, as we've heard. It is hard to sometimes, conceive of it. So it's really nice to actually hear about these individual people, because it, really makes this experience real and personal. Because of course, every person who's experiencing homelessness is an individual story. Daniel, it would be lovely to hear about perhaps one of the people you've worked with.
Yeah. I mean, I think, one of the things I want to say sort of before sharing some stories, my favorite part of my job, like I said, is getting to share some of the stories of my friend's place, because, what we've been talking about so far is just failure after structure that is set up to impede people's ability to live fulfilling, self-sufficient, and wonderful lives, right? And I think that's real, and those structures are real, and like a huge part of our work is fighting against those structures, both at policy level, as Jordyn was talking about, and then individual level. But I think it's so important to center myself, and also all of us, and that these are amazing people that we're working with, and their stories are incredible and beautiful, and hope change is possible and real. And that's sort of the thing at my friend's place that keeps me feeling good, amazingly. So we recently shared with some of our supporters a story about a young man named Chris that we've known for some time. And Chris was he's from Los Angeles. Also important to note that, unlike a misconception that most unhoused people in Los Angeles have moved here, it's not true. Chances are, based on demographics, that your unhoused neighbors in Los Angeles, if you're here, have been here longer than you. So Chris is from Los Angeles, and when he came out as a gay identifying man, he lost his housing. His parents didn't accept him for that. He had nowhere to go, so he experienced years of homelessness on the streets. When I was talking to him about this, he shared with me that that period of time, again, like we've talked about, it's so important to state that not only is losing housing a trauma, but the amount of trauma that people can experience while on the street it's really severe and unimaginable. And he shared with me that he fell into pretty deep depression, and eventually even suicidal ideation. And he started coming to my friend's place, sort of struggling with a lot of these symptoms, and connected with one of our case managers, who's this incredible person named Kayla. And over time, the thing that we offer at my friend's place, in addition to all of the sort of tangible resources, food, counseling, arts workshops, all these other things, we offer community. And we've come to realize how important that is for our young people. Everybody needs a crew, right? But especially young people, it's so important when you're forming your identity to have people to hang out with. So we have a space that people can come into and make friends and just be safe and hang out. And that's so important. And so Chris started coming in and learning that this was a place that he could feel safe. And eventually that built a bit of rapport between him and some of the staff, and especially his case manager, Kayla. About 9 months ago, after about 3.5 years of homelessness, Chris moved into housing. And I got to come with him, and he just toured me around his apartment, and it was so great. He's really just, an amazing young person who is now housed, who is still really connected to my friend's place, who is, doing the work of starting to really piece together what is meaningful to him in his life. And now that he has housing, we know housing isn't the only thing he needs, but now that he has that as a base level, as well as the community and the safety net that he gets at my friend's place and other organizations, he's able to start building back towards a life that is meaningful and fulfilling and self-sufficient for him. And so, I think that story to me just demonstrates that, it is possible for a person who is really in a difficult situation to find themselves back on their feet, as Chris would say. And And that's the work. That's what we do every single day, is try to get people to that place.
It's so good to know there's people like you guys out there building these networks. I mean, we were talking about how, the network is so important, because myself and many of my friends have experienced times where we couldn't afford rent for extended amounts of time, but luckily we've had support networks where we've never had to sleep on the streets or, houses, but that it happens. And so when someone doesn't have that network, it's fantastic that they can find people like yourselves to bridge that gap, hopefully. Obviously the inequalities of society are very much reflected in the levels of homelessness in different communities, and systemic racism of societies certainly evident. I'd love to talk a little bit about how your organisations work from a social justice perspective. Jordyn, I know you wanted to talk about that.
Sure. Yeah. So systemic racism, it's embedded throughout all of the economic and social systems whose shortcomings contribute to homelessness. So housing, health, education, employment, child welfare, juvenile justice. But moreover, it's also embedded in the homeless assistance system itself. So in our assessment tools, in our definitions, I think we all have space to continue to evaluate and grow. And one of the ways that we are both doing that ourselves and helping other organizations to do just that is we are right now using the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, which is a national survey of high school students. And we are using it to help educators understand the disproportionalities among high school students experiencing homelessness. But we're taking it a step further. We don't just want them to understand, we want them to take action steps to address it. For example, creating partnerships and outreach to culturally specific organizations, creating trauma-informed schools, and so forth. And the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, it looks at a lot of different things, but just to give you an idea of some of the data points that we're drawing from, it found that African-American high school students are 2.67 times more likely to experience homelessness than their white peers. And it found that Hispanic high school students were 1.68 times more likely. And even just moving away into other vulnerable populations, it found that for every 10 high school students experiencing homelessness, 3 of them identified as LGBTQ. And in general, LGBTQ students were 2.94 times more likely to experience homelessness. So we're seeing, the data's there. And so what we're trying to do as an organization is share that data to school systems and organizations, and then help and say, like, okay, what are action steps that you can take in your local school to, put positive discipline processes in place to, as I said, get connected to culturally specific organizations in your community, and so on and so forth.
Holly, obviously you're specifically dealing with women. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what are the challenges women experiencing homelessness specifically face?
Yeah, so gender-based violence is something that we hear a lot about from the women that we serve. So a lot of them are coming to us with experiences of assault or harassment that they've experienced either on the streets or in their personal life at some point. We actually are seeing an increase of older women experiencing homelessness, and this may be because they've been widowed and their primary income source is no longer available. The other piece about, and this goes back to something Jordyn said, is that we recently launched an initiative called Project 100, which is an effort to focus specifically on the experience of Black women experiencing homelessness. Because what we found when we were looking at retention rates, meaning the number of people who get into housing and stay housed, that Black women were experiencing higher rates of returning to homelessness. And there were a lot of reasons behind this. And we So we launched this initiative called Project 100, where we're working to talk with landlords about navigating cultural differences. We're working with the women who have been chronically homeless to help them navigate and enter housing. So I think that the experience of women is just unique in some ways because just because of the violence that is directed at women and the experience of violence that so many women have in their lifetimes.
And does that track, Daniel, with the LGBTQ kids that you've been working with?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, all of it tracks, right? I mean, the reasons for entering, I think this is actually such an important point to arrive at, that the reasons why young people, like the specific, thing that actually forced a young person into homelessness, it may be different circumstances than the things that pushed an adult into homelessness. But the structures behind those reasons are the same, right? The systemic racism, as we know, manifests in different places, right? But the increased I don't want to say participation, the increased harassment, by police and other law enforcement entities that causes the spike of young African Americans with the juvenile justice system, right? We see an enormous amount of people coming out of the juvenile justice system into my friend's place, into homelessness. Those are the same structures that lead to the increased rates of adult African Americans in the adult justice system who then experience homelessness. Yeah, go ahead. No, please go ahead.
I mean, it's very clear that the homelessness issue is really the symptom, not the problem.
I think that's like the most important point, right? That we have to address that there are structures behind this, and I think we've talked about a lot of them that are largely just like, they're fixable problems, right? Like, this is a solvable issue. We can end homelessness in LA and in the United States, but it depends on fixing these structures that, the lack of a social safety net, the pervasiveness of systemic racism, the lack of an ability to combat poverty effectively in the United States, the focus on combating, switching from the war on drugs from the war on poverty in the 1960s to the war on drugs in the 1980s. We see that that has a direct impact on homelessness. Right. So I think that, these are structures that have been put in place, that we can and are combating, both on a structural level and at an individual level.
Do you believe that homelessness is a solvable problem?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Unfortunately, though, obviously this year has been a tough year, and so many people's livelihoods and safety nets have been removed through the epidemic. Have you kind of seen that play out amongst your various communities, Jordyn?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I mentioned earlier, we have this issue within the school system of virtual learning, distance learning, and how much inequality is at play there, and lack of resources for children and families that are experiencing homelessness, and how we have lost 420,000. So there's that piece that I think is going to have long-standing effects that we can't even conceptualize at this point. Beyond that, I think, we've got to think about some of, again, the process and red tape that is ignoring certain populations. So, for example, we look at the eviction moratoria and the rent relief proposals. Individuals and families that are staying in motels or staying with families temporarily can't access that. I've got students who are unaccompanied and have been on their own, experiencing homelessness for years, who found out this year that their parents claimed them as dependents on their taxes, and therefore they didn't qualify for the $1,500 COVID relief payment. And so this, these kind of processes and eligibility requirements that are ignoring some of these populations or some of these issues that the populations are facing are both going to, I think, increase the number of individuals experiencing homelessness, but also increase the likelihood that the individuals we've been able to house are going to re-enter the system. So I think that, unfortunately right now it already looks bad and in terms of the impact of COVID. And again, I think we can't even conceptualize the long-term impacts it's going to have. I think that, again, bringing in the bright side, that I have seen really, really innovative work on behalf of local providers, doing everything they can. I think I saw on Instagram the other day, my friend's place did COVID-19 testing. I think that local providers are doing everything they can to best serve their clients and to get creative and get innovative. And I think that is what we are going to continue to have to do to mitigate the impact of the pandemic.
Does it madden you slightly that it's your non-profit organizations and not part of the government?
Always. We're thankful for the contacts that we're able to have at the national level and the champions that we have on our behalf. But I think that Dan, Holly, and myself could all speak to, sometimes when you're not on the ground and you're not doing the direct service, it's hard to really know. It's hard to really know what's going on and what's needed. And that's where having people listen, like everyone that's attending the panel today is doing, is so critical to learn from and make plans for the future.
Because it does feel like work that should be part of governmental work. Holly, what's been your experience, the shift during this COVID epidemic?
Yeah, so, previous recessions have hit different segments of the population differently. And what has been very evident about this experience of the COVID pandemic is that it's hit women particularly hard. All of the industries that have shut down or have been affected with closing businesses are very much industries that employ a lot of women. So you think about teachers in schools, like the fact that we've had this debate back and forth about going back to school. Most of those teachers are women, so are they going to risk their lives to teach our children? Are industries like retail or like cleaning services, we just have a lot of minimum wage jobs or entry-level jobs that have been majorly affected by this pandemic. I'll just give a quick story. When we first went into this quarantine, one of our staff was working with a woman who had fled a domestic violence situation, and she lost her job because of the pandemic and was at risk of losing her housing. So she reunited with the man that had abused her to be able to keep her housing. And so she returned to an abusive relationship. And what was challenging for our case managers is that, they were trying to reach out to her and continue to support her, but she was back in this environment where he was monitoring her phone. He was, keeping an eye on everywhere she was going and her phone calls and all of those kind of things. So I think that story of just women kind of going back into dangerous situations, that's the last thing we want to see happen. And this pandemic has really forced a lot of people to make very difficult choices.
And it's crazy hearing you say things like, teachers, people with jobs that should be stable, slipping into homelessness.
Mm-hmm.
Like that just shouldn't be. I think that's, again, it speaks to the sort of universality of this issue. That does anyone know what's going on with the East Coast right now and, this severe weather? What happens when something like this happens, like during this extreme weather?
Yeah, so maybe we can collaboratively answer this because I am on the East Coast, but again, I primarily work within education. I do work part-time at a family shelter on the weekends. And something that I have specifically seen that has been challenging in the DMV area with snow is, we traditionally our shelter that I work at on the weekends has, our regular capacity, but we also have a community room that we use for white flag nights. So really cold nights where we can bring in people with no eligibility, no requirements to get them out of the cold. But because of the COVID-19 requirements for social distancing and other county requirements, we can't do that. And so shelters are having to get really, really creative, and they're already inundated. Like we're already full, completely full, because, you know, more people are in need of shelter and they need a safe space to socially distance and quarantine and so on and so forth. And then in addition, the extra space we did have, it's harder for us to use. So I think that the shelter system, from what I'm seeing, at least in the DMV area, is doing the absolute best that they can to have as many creative spaces as possible to shelter as many people as possible, but COVID has not helped. One thing that the organization on the weekend that I work for has done is they opened an old hotel, and it is now the COVID-19 shelter for the 4-county area. So any individual that is at risk of homelessness or at risk of COVID and experiencing homelessness, or even has COVID, can quarantine in the hotel rooms and have shelter for an extended period of time. So that's just one example of how they're getting creative. But I think with the winter weather, that's always hard, and now it is just exponentially harder given social distancing requirements.
I mean, it's been amazing hearing about this sort of vast array of ways that you're tackling this issue and helping people from all these different facing directions. It would be lovely to hear a little bit about how people can get involved, donate their time, their money. Daniel, what would be your kind of call to action?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I know that there's a fundraiser running with LA Gives Back, so please donate there if you can, if you're able. It will be split evenly between our 3 organizations, and I think all of us are doing really special work. So highly encourage you to do that. At my friend's place, if you go to our website, which is oh God, what is it? Is it myfriendsplace.org? It's myfriendsplace.org. Or follow us on social media. We're always posting the things that we need. Right now, it's going to be gift cards for our young people to be given as gifts for the holidays. The holiday season can be a particularly lonely and isolating time, especially for everybody, especially during COVID, and especially for young people who are already isolated because of their housing status. So that can be a great way to help. And otherwise, I encourage you to just get in touch, send over an email to one of us, give a call, so that we can tell you more about what we're doing, because our needs are changing. The great thing about MFP is we're able to be very flexible. So our needs are changing all the time, but what doesn't change is, well, our need for you guys who are watching. So thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel, and thanks for reminding us that the kids that you're working with have so much potential and have such great stories. Jordyn, what's your call to action?
Yeah, so all of the funds that are raised as a part of LA Gives Back for us are going to be going directly to our students, so to our scholarship program. So every single dollar raised is going directly back to ensuring that our students are able to access and succeed in higher education. So I want to start by saying thank you to everyone that has donated so far and that plans to. Beyond donating though, because I know we don't, right now is a hard time for people to donate. And so there are other ways to give back. And that is something that we focus heavily on our website at the national level. So we have tons of resources. If this panel today piqued your interest and you don't know much about homelessness, we have tons of resources to learn more. We also have a policy section where you can use your voice to make sure that children, youth, and families that are experiencing homelessness aren't left out of COVID relief. So like right now, we've got a template that you can use to urge Congress to include the Emergency Family and Stabilization Act that I mentioned, as well as funding for the Emergency Homeless Children and Youth Act in the final bill that's being negotiated, and in all future COVID legislation. And so we have ample opportunities for you to use your voice policy-wise, as well as to learn. And we are always accepting donations either targeted to our scholarship program or to our advocacy or practical assistance work.
That's great, Jordyn. Thanks so much. Holly, what about you?
Yeah, so I'd encourage people to visit our website, downtownwomencenter.org. You're welcome to sign up for our newsletter or contribute to our organization directly. Everything that's donated today through LA Gives Back helps support us with finding housing and placing women in housing, as well as providing employment opportunities for women. I just want to also say that, if you care about seeing these systems of injustice addressed in your community, all three of our organizations are such a great place to contribute to. And I really love talking to donors about what they value and how they're using their money to support those values. So I just encourage you to, it may not be one of our organizations, but it may be something that you just really care about and value. Just continue to support those organizations and talk about those organizations, share about them on social media. And thank you so much for the donations that you've provided for all of us today.
Do you, the Downtown Women's Centre, do you also clothes, volunteering, that kind of thing, or is it better, is really financial assistance the main thing?
Well, right now we're at capacity with our storage for donations, like clothing and all of those kind of things. So what we still need are snack packs, which you can go on our website. We definitely have a need for food if people are interested in donating. And then on our website, there's a way to find out about remote volunteer opportunities. So putting together those snack packs and helping us at a distance.
Well, thanks so much. It's really been an honour to talk to you and understand a bit more about what's going on in this broader situation. Good luck with everything, and everyone who's watching, get donating.
Thank you so much, Tabitha. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Okay.